beaten until her hearing was gone in both ears. A cowboy learned her hand signs and gave her a quiet joy. There's a particular quiet that comes off the flats in August, after the heat breaks and before the crickets start up again. A gap in the sound. Most men never notice it. I noticed it the first night I brought her home because she was sitting at the kitchen table and her hands were folded and she wasn't talking and neither was I and neither of us needed to, and I thought, this is what she lives in. All the time. This exact thing. I want to tell it right. My name is Roy Calvert. I am 61 years old and I have run cattle on this piece of ground for 32 of those years. I have been married before. Agnes died of a fever when we were young, and I put that part of me in the ground with her and didn't dig it back up for a long time. The ranch kept me busy enough. There is always something breaking or drying out or getting into the wire, and a man can fill 20 years with the upkeep of a thing if he lets himself. I let myself. The ranch is a fact I can state plainly. 460 acres east of Comanche Flat, running from the creek on the south to the ridge on the west where the hills start. Good grass on the east pasture, rocky ground on the west side, but useful for cattle who know how to pick their way. I have 9 horses, which is more horses than I need, and I know it. I just like horses. I have had as many as 40 head of beef cattle and as few as 12, depending on the year and the rain. The house is sound, 2 rooms main and 2 added on, and I have kept it up the way I keep everything. Not perfectly, but honestly. I am not a man who talks much. This has been remarked on over the years, not always with admiration. I have found that most of what passes for conversation is people making noise so they don't have to think, and I would rather be quiet and think than talk and not. This has made me a man people respect at a distance and don't entirely understand up close, which suits me fine most of the time. Agnes understood me. That was the thing about Agnes. She didn't need me to explain myself all the time, didn't need the noise. We could work alongside each other for a whole day and say a dozen words and it was easy. When she died, she was 29, a hard, fast fever in the winter of her 3rd pregnancy. The baby didn't make it either. When she died, I understood for the first time what it meant to be alone. Not lonely, which is wanting company. Alone, which is being without the specific person who made you feel known. I was alone for a long time after that. It was Elias Prue who brought her to my attention. Elias ran the feed store in Comanche Flat, and he knew everybody's business and most of their sorrow, which is the occupational hazard of a feed store man. He came out one Tuesday morning in June with a sack of oats I hadn't ordered, and I told him so, and he said the oats were an excuse. He wanted to talk to me about a situation. The situation was a woman named Clara Mast. She had come to town 6 weeks prior in the back of a settler's wagon, one of 3 families who'd come through from Kansas looking for ground. The other 2 families had kept moving west. Clara had stayed. Elias didn't say why she'd separated from them, not right then, and I didn't push. What he said was that she was living in a room above the dry goods store and doing mending work for 2 bits a shirt, and that she was deaf. Not born deaf. That was what Elias said next, and he said it quiet, the way you say a thing that has weight to it. Not born deaf. Both ears gone. Beaten was what he didn't say, but what sat between his words plain enough. I asked how old she was. He said he thought 35, maybe 40. I asked if she had people. He said no, not that she'd said much of anything, she being difficult to converse with, her not hearing and most folks not knowing how to reach her except by writing on paper. I said I didn't know what any of this had to do with me. Elias picked up a piece of loose wire from my fence post and bent it around his finger and said, "You've got that east pasture standing empty since you sold off the Hereford herd. You've got that extra room in the house nobody sleeps in. You're 58 years old and you eat standing at the stove." I told him I liked standing at the stove. He dropped the wire and got back on his wagon and left. I stood there looking at the dust from his wheels for a while. Then I went back to what I'd been doing, which was mending the post itself, and I did not think about it for the rest of the day. I thought about it that night, though. I thought about both ears gone. I have shot guns my whole life, and I know the sound that stays with you after a loud one, the ringing that won't quit. I thought about a man whose hands did that. I thought about it lying in the dark, listening to the creek and the wind in the cottonwoods and all the small sounds a night ranch makes, and I thought, she has none of that. All that is gone. 3 weeks later, I drove into Comanche Flat for nails, and I didn't go to the dry goods store, and I didn't go looking for anybody. But I did stop at the well in the center of town for water, and she was there. She had her back to me when I came up. Dark hair, some gray in it, pinned back without particular care. A dress that had been washed many times and fitted to her with the adjustment a woman makes to old clothes, taking in here, letting out there. She was drawing the bucket up, and the rope was old and rough, and she was working it hand over hand without complaint or hurry. When she turned and saw me, she didn't startle the way you sometimes see a person who's lost their hearing startle, that flinch of sudden world. She just looked at me. Her face was plain and honest. There was an old scar along her left jaw, thin and pale, angled like something that had been meant to do more damage than it did. Her eyes were dark brown, and they were the most alert eyes I had seen in a long time, the kind of eyes that have learned to read everything because they can't read sound. She was looking at my face the way a reader goes through a page, top to bottom, nothing skipped. I nodded, she nodded back. I filled my canteen. She walked back toward the dry goods store with her bucket. That was the whole of it. But I thought about those eyes for a week. I am not a man who acts on impulse. I will say that plainly. I think about a thing from several sides before I move on it, which some people find frustrating, and which has saved my life and my ranch on at least 4 occasions. So when I drove back into Comanche Flat the following Saturday, I had thought it through, and I had a clear idea of what I was doing and why. What I was doing was going to talk to a woman I'd seen for 3 minutes at a well. What I was doing it for, I was less clear on. I found her at the back table of the dry goods store with a pile of shirts in front of her and a needle in her hand. The store owner, a man named Gatch who I had never much liked, pointed me at her without looking up from his ledger. Like she was a piece of inventory he was tolerating until it sorted itself out. She saw me come in and watched me cross the floor, and I could see her hands go still on the shirt she was mending, waiting to find out what I wanted. There was a stillness to the waiting that wasn't fear exactly, not the braced stillness of someone expecting to be hit, but more like calculation. Who is this? What does he want? How do I handle it? I could see she had gotten good at reading strangers fast. You would in her position. I had brought paper. I had thought about that on the drive-in. I tore off a piece and wrote, "My name is Roy Calvert. I have a ranch 4 miles east. Elias Prue told me about you. I am not here to bother you. I don't know why I'm here exactly." I put the paper in front of her and stepped back. She read it. She looked up at me. Something in her face shifted, not softened exactly, more like it became specific. The way a landscape becomes specific when a cloud moves and the light changes, and you see the actual shape of the hills that were there all along. She picked up my pencil and wrote, "Clara Mast, why did you come?" I wrote back, "I don't know, that's honest." She looked at that for a moment, then she picked up the shirt and went back to mending. I thought she was done with me. I started to fold the paper. Then she picked up the pencil again without looking up from her work and wrote, sideways at the bottom of the page, small and contained, like a thought she decided to let escape, "Come back if you figure it out." I folded the paper and put it in my coat pocket, and I drove home, and I thought about it the whole 4 miles. I came back the next Saturday, and the one after that. For the first 3 visits, we talked on paper, short exchanges, nothing urgent. I asked her what she was mending. She told me shirts mostly, some trousers, the occasional dress seam that had given way. I told her about a fence I was fixing, the old way a fence post goes, the rot that starts at the ground line and works upward. She told me about a book she was reading. She was a reader, I could see that, had a worn copy of something tucked behind the shirt pile. I asked what it was. She wrote essays. Then after a pause, "Emerson, do you know him?" I wrote, "Heard of him." She wrote, "He'd have liked the West." I thought about that for a while. It was slow, this kind of talk, and there was a lot of waiting while one of us wrote, but I didn't mind the waiting. I have spent 30 years working with animals, and the land and neither is in a hurry about anything. A cow will not be rushed, and a fence post does not care when you get to it, and a good horse takes the time it takes. I had learned patience the way most ranchers do, not because it's a virtue exactly, but because the alternative is fighting everything all the time, and you can't win that fight. On the 4th visit, she brought a small book with her, sat it on the table between us. It was worn through at the spine, handmade lettering on the cover that said "Gesture and Sign, a Practical Guide." She opened it to the first page and turned it toward me. The page showed a hand, a drawing of a hand, fingers in a particular position, and beside it the word, "Hello." She looked at me. I looked at the book, then I looked at her. She made the sign, right hand, flat, fingers together, lifted from her brow outward. A small, precise movement. Patient, like she'd made it 1,000 times and would make it 1,000 more and was not in a hurry to find out whether I'd catch it. I tried it. My hand is large and the knuckles are thick from weather and work, and I suspect it didn't look elegant. But I made the shape. She smiled. It was the first time I had seen her smile. It was a real one, not the polite kind people give you when you've done something merely adequate, but the kind that starts in the eyes first and comes into the mouth after, the kind that means something changed just now. I tried to keep my face even. I don't know if I managed it. I came back the next Saturday with the book. I had borrowed it when she wasn't looking, told Gatch I'd return it, and I had spent the week at my kitchen table in the evenings after supper going through the pages with one hand on a glass of water and one hand making shapes in the lamplight. Water, horse, come, go, good, thank you, morning, cold, warm, yes, no. I practiced them until my hand knew them without my brain having to think, the way your hand knows a rope or a hammer after enough years. I practiced them on the horses. Big sorrel mare named Lace. She watched my hands with the usual horse wariness, those wide dark eyes tracking the movement, and I signed at her until she stopped twitching and just stood there being patient about it. I practiced on the open air of the yard in the evenings, the shapes going out into nothing, nobody to receive them, just me learning the shape of a language that belonged to someone else, and that I intended to borrow until I had enough of it to be useful. When I sat down across from her that Saturday and signed, slowly, imperfectly, with too much tension in my wrist, water, and pointed at the bucket near the door, she put both hands flat on the table and stared at me. I signed again, water. She picked up the bucket and filled me a cup and set it down in front of me, and her hands were not entirely steady when she did it. She stood for a moment with her back to me, and when she turned her face was even, but there was something happening in it that she was working to contain. She sat down, she signed, you studied. I signed some. She signed how long? I signed a week. She looked at me again in that full reading way. Then she picked up the gesture book and opened it to a page I hadn't reached yet, something more complex, a phrase. She walked me through it, sign by sign. That was the real beginning. There is a thing that happens when you learn another person's language. Not the words, the way a language sits in the body, the shape of how someone says a thing, which is never quite the dictionary shape. Clara's signing was quick and fluid, and had a particular quality to it that I came to recognize as hers, the way you recognize a person's walk before you see their face. She used her whole hand, not just her fingers. There was nothing cramped about it. When she was certain of something, the signs were firm and clean, like good fence work. When she was uncertain or thinking, she'd let her hands rest between signs, the pause being part of the meaning. Mine was slow. Mine was careful. Mine was, I think, clearly the signing of a man who had come to it late and was working hard at it and was not embarrassed by working hard at it. I have never been embarrassed about learning. There is a kind of man who would rather appear competent than become competent, and I am not that man. I would rather be openly bad at a thing and get better at it than pretend I already know. She never laughed at me. When I made an error, she corrected it without fuss, took my hand sometimes, repositioned my fingers, let go. The first time she did that, I don't think she thought anything of it. She was just correcting my grip the way you'd correct a man's grip on a tool, practical, without sentiment. The second time I was more aware of it. By the fourth or fifth time it was just part of how we talked, her hand on mine for a moment, adjusting, releasing. In October, I asked her to come out to the ranch. I wrote it on paper first because I wanted her to have time to read it and think it over without me watching her face. I slid it across the table and looked at the wall. Come see the place sometime. No obligation, just to see the country out there. She read it, I heard the paper on the table. After a moment she wrote back, what kind of country? I wrote big, flat, some good hills to the west, a creek that mostly runs, grass that'll make you understand what grass can be. She wrote, I'll come Sunday. She arrived Sunday morning in a borrowed buggy, the air already sharp with October, the sky that flat blue that comes with the first cold. I was at the fence line when I saw her coming down the road, a small figure in a dark buggy against the big sky, and I put the hammer down and walked back to meet her at the yard gate. She had a different dress on the same quality of fabric, many times washed, but dark blue instead of brown. She had let her hair down some from its usual severe pins, more of it loose around her face. I didn't remark on any of this. She would have known I noticed, and I didn't want to make a thing of it. I showed her the east pasture first. The grass was long there and going gold with the season, the seed heads catching light, and the sky was doing something complicated with clouds over the western hills. She walked out into the middle of it and stopped and just looked. Her face did the thing it had done that first day at the well, became specific, present. She was all the way in her eyes, reading the land the way she read everything, the way she read faces and books and rooms. She turned to me and signed, "How long have you had this?" I signed back, 30 years, my hands. She nodded, looked back at the hills. Signed, "Beautiful." Then a sign I didn't know, fingers spread wide, moved in a slow, deliberate arc like she was drawing the horizon itself. I spread my hands in a question. She thought for a moment, then pointed at the sky, at the grass, at the whole of it stretching out to the edge of what could be seen, and made the sign again. I understood the spirit of it, something like belonging to no one, something like free. Or maybe, as big as it needs to be and no bigger. I didn't have the exact word, and she knew I didn't, and she seemed to feel that was all right. Sometimes understanding the spirit of a thing is enough, and we had both reached an age where we knew that. I made her lunch. I am not a sophisticated cook. There was bread and beef and onions and dried apple, and she ate without ceremony, and that suited me. After we sat on the porch and I watched her watch the land, and I thought about Agnes, just briefly, the way you think about a healed wound sometimes, not with pain but with acknowledgement. It happened. It was real. It made you what you are. Before she got back in the buggy, I signed, carefully, "Come again." She gathered the reins and looked at me for a moment from the seat. The light was gone golden behind her. Then she signed, "Yes." She came again the next Sunday, and the one after. By December, she was coming twice a week. I drove in on Wednesdays, and she came out on Sundays. I fixed the east fence through November, and she sometimes sat on the tailgate of the wagon with her mending and worked while I worked, not in each other's way, not needing to be. The land was cold now, the grass brown and dry, the creek running clear with the early cold snaps. There was a thing I had started to notice, the particular quality of working alongside someone who doesn't need to fill the silence. I had not had that since Agnes. Most people are uncomfortable in quiet. They start talking to fill it, and usually the talking is about nothing, just noise to paper over the fact that they are not comfortable enough with themselves or with you to simply be present in the same air. Clara was comfortable. She would sit with her mending, and I would work the fence, and the wind would come through and take the cottonwood leaves, and neither of us would say anything, and it was good. A particular kind of good you can't manufacture. I kept signing. My vocabulary was bigger now, and she was harder on me in proportion, would wait if I used a wrong sign, patient but not accepting the error, making me go back and find the right one. I began to care about precision the way she cared about it, because precision in signing is not aesthetic, it is meaning itself. The wrong hand shape and you have said a different thing. You have said danger when you meant safe. You have said alone when you meant together. It mattered. We ate supper together when she came on Sundays. That was not part of any agreement. It happened naturally, both of us at the table at the same time, and then it kept happening. She helped with the cooking sometimes, and I got out of her way when she knew what she was doing, which was more often than not. The meals got better. We did not light the lamp until we had to. The light coming through the western window lasted a long time in those November evenings, going red at the end of it, and we would sit at the table and sign and sometimes not sign, and it was fine either way. One evening in late November she signed, "You don't talk about your wife." I said no. She said, "Why?" I thought about it. I signed, not because it's painful anymore, because it's mine. Like the pasture, you can see it, but it's mine to keep. She looked at that for a moment. Her hands were still on the table. Then, I understand. I think she did, the way you only understand something if you've had the same kind of private grief. The thing you hold that isn't for other people and doesn't need to be. Another evening, earlier in the week, I had come in from the south pasture with a cut on my forearm from the wire, nothing bad, the kind of thing that happens in a day's work. She had seen me come in favoring it, and she brought a cloth and the bottle of carbolic from the shelf, and she cleaned it out without asking, matter of fact, her hands steady and efficient. I sat at the table and let her. It is a strange thing to let someone take care of a small wound. With a large wound, you don't have a choice, you need help, and you know it. But a small wound you could handle yourself, you've handled worse, and letting someone else take it is a different kind of thing. It asks you to be still and to receive something, and that is harder for a man of a certain kind than any physical work. I was still, I received it. When she finished and wrapped the cloth around it, she looked up at me, and we were close together at the table, and her hands were still on my arm, and her eyes were level and very close, and she didn't look away. I signed, "Thank you." She signed back, "Good." But she kept her hands on my arm a moment longer before she moved. Not long, just long enough. January brought a hard stretch. 3 weeks of cold that came down out of the north and killed 2 of my calves and froze the creek solid and kept her in town. I drove in on the Wednesday of the second week because I had supplies to get, and because I had started to notice her absence the way you notice a sound that's stopped. Not until it's gone do you understand how present it had been. She was in the dry goods store as usual. Her hands were reddened from cold. The room above the store was not well heated, the building old and gapped at the eaves. We signed across the table, and I asked about the work, and she showed me a stack of mending, and I could see how much of it there was, how little it paid, how she was making it work by will alone and a considerable reserve of stubbornness. I also noticed that visit, the way the town treated her. Not cruelly, nothing you could point to and name, but there was a way people moved around her in the store, a slight widening of the path, a not quite meeting of eyes, that I recognized as the discomfort of people who don't know what to do with someone they can't easily talk to. Gatch ran her errands through paper and kept his face careful. 2 women came in while I was there, and one of them glanced at Clara and then looked at me with an expression that said, "You know her," like it was something requiring explanation. I looked back at them with my regular face, which I have been told is not encouraging to further questions. Clara didn't see any of it, or if she did, she had learned not to let it show. She kept her eyes on her mending. She had probably been invisible 100 times over in that room. A woman who can't hear and can't be easily reached, doing quiet work in the back corner, it would be easy for a town to just look past her. Keep her manageable and not quite counted. I wrote on paper, "I need a hand at the ranch. There's cooking and the light mending my shirts always want and keeping the house some. I don't ask you to do it for nothing, I'll pay you fair. And the room is warm." She read it twice. She looked up. Her face was careful, the way it got when she was weighing something. I had been deliberate with what I wrote. I was aware it could be read 2 ways, as exactly what I said, a practical offer, and as something else I also meant but hadn't put on paper. I didn't want to put her in a position of having to refuse or accommodate something she hadn't asked for. I wanted her to come for the right reasons, not because she had nowhere else. She picked up the pencil and wrote, "What are the terms?" I wrote, "Your own room. Fair wages, $10 a month. No obligation past the work itself. You go when you want to go." She put the pencil down and folded her hands and looked at nothing for a moment, the particular look she had when she was thinking past the surface of a thing. Then she wrote, "When?" I wrote, "When the cold breaks." She came in the first week of February, when the temperature lifted, and the creek opened back up, and the calves that had made it through were up and moving. She came in the borrowed buggy with 1 trunk and a carpet bag, and the gesture book and 3 more books I hadn't seen before. I carried her trunk in. She looked over the house, not appraising it for its worth, just learning it, the way she looked at everything, reading its shape and its history. The arrangement of the rooms, where the light came from at what hour, which window caught the morning. She had that habit, entering a space and immediately understanding it, the way an animal knows a new pasture, what it offers, and where its edges are. I showed her the room, which had been Agnes's sewing room and then a storage room for 20 years. I had cleaned it and put a new quilt on the bed, and there was a good window to the east. She set her carpet bag down and stood at the window for a moment and looked out at the pasture, the flat winter grass, the hills gray-brown in the February light. Then she turned and signed, "Good light." That was all, but she meant it. I could tell she meant it the way you can tell when a person is actually present in what they're saying and not just filling space. February ran into March, and the work settled into a rhythm. She was good at what she did, not theatrical about it, not making a show of her usefulness, just doing the work cleanly and well. The shirts came back mended better than I had done them. The kitchen was better run than I had run it, the meals more varied, the house warmer in a way that had nothing to do with the stove. She moved through the house and the yard the way she moved through everything, with full attention and without waste. I began to see the ranch through her eyes a little, which was a different way of seeing it than I'd had for 20 years. The east pasture looked different to me now that I had watched her look at it. The creek looked different. Even the horses looked different. She had made friends with Lace by the second week, moving slow and steady around her, and Lace, who was picky about people, had decided she was all right. I kept signing. My vocabulary was bigger now, and she was harder on me in proportion, would wait if I used a wrong sign, patient but not accepting the error, making me find the right one the way a good teacher won't let you get away with approximate. I began to notice when I was signing imprecisely the way a carpenter notices a joint that's not quite flush. I began to care about precision for its own sake, because she had taught me that precision in signing is not a matter of style, it is meaning itself. The wrong hand shape and you have said a different thing. You have said danger when you meant safe. You have said alone when you meant together. It mattered. We ate supper together. That was not part of the terms I'd written. It happened naturally, both of us at the same time, and then it kept happening. We did not light the lamp until we had to. The light coming through the western window lasted a long time in March, going red at the end of it, and we would sit at the table and sign and sometimes not sign, and it was fine either way. One evening in late March she signed to me, "You don't talk about your wife." I said no. She said, "Why?" I thought about it. I signed, not because it's painful anymore, because it's mine. Like the pasture, you can see it, but it's mine to keep. She looked at that for a moment. Then I understand. Another evening I had come in from the south pasture with a cut on my forearm from the wire, nothing bad, the kind of thing that happens in a day's work. She had seen me come in favoring it, and she brought a cloth and the bottle of carbolic from the shelf, and she cleaned it out without asking, her hands steady and competent. I sat at the table and let her. It is a strange thing to let someone take care of a small wound. With a large wound, you don't have a choice. But a small wound you could handle yourself, and letting someone else take it asks you to be still and to receive something, and that is harder for a man of a certain kind than any physical work. I was still, I received it. When she finished and wrapped the cloth around it, she looked up at me, and we were close together at the table, and her hands were still on my arm, and her eyes were level and very close, and she didn't look away. I signed, "Thank you." She signed back, "Good." But she kept her hands on my arm a moment longer before she moved. Not long, just long enough. April. The calves were up, and the grass was coming, and I had a fence project on the south end that wanted 2 weeks of solid work. Clara had taken to walking the east pasture in the mornings with her coffee, just walking it slow, looking at it. I watched her from the yard sometimes. A woman walking unhurried through a big piece of country in the morning light is not a small thing to see. It is a thing that can do something to a man. I had not said anything about what I felt. I am a deliberate man, and I was being deliberately deliberate about it, which I recognized as a kind of cowardice even at the time. But I told myself I was waiting for the right moment and the right way to say a thing that I did not want to say wrong. The thing about Clara was that she did not push. She had no need to push. She had come from a life where a man's demands had been constant and violent, and the absence of that was something she was still learning to trust, like a horse that's been badly handled, learning that not every raised hand is a threat. I could feel that she was watching me for signs, not that I was dangerous, she had already decided I wasn't, but what I actually was underneath the function of the ranch and the work and the plain, useful fact of me. I came in on a Thursday afternoon with mud to my knees and sat down at the table, and she put coffee in front of me without being asked and sat down across from me with her own, and we were quiet for a while in the comfortable way we'd developed. She signed, "You've been worried about something." I said no. She said, "You have, not the ranch, something else. I can tell the difference in you by now." That was true. She had learned me the way she learned everything, by full attention over time. I looked at my coffee. She signed, and she was careful with it, precise and unhurried. "You don't have to say it." I looked up. She was looking at me with those eyes that read everything, and I thought, she already knows. She has probably known for a while. She is giving me room to not say it if I can't. I signed, "I don't want you to leave." She was still. I signed, "I know that's not what we agreed. I know the terms I wrote. I'm not asking you to, I'm not putting anything on you. I just want you to know that My signing had gotten fast and imprecise, and I knew it, and I stopped. I am not a man who runs his mouth. I had never been a man who ran his mouth even with his hands. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, stopped the signing. I looked at her hand on mine. Her fingers were long, and the nails were short and practical. and there was a faint scar across 2 of the knuckles that I had looked at across 100 suppers. She signed with one hand, her other still on mine. I know. I said, you know. She said, I've known for a while. I was waiting for you to know. I said, and I got this sign right. I was careful with it. I was afraid to say it wrong. She said, you said it fine. Outside, the light was going long and gold across the pasture, and one of the horses was moving along the fence line in that loose, easy way horses have when the day is good and there's nothing pressing on them. I turned my hand under hers so they were palm to palm. She didn't move. I want to tell about the thing that happened in May, because it is part of this. A man came to the ranch. A man I had not seen before, 30s, rider's build, hard-used horse that needed water. He said he was looking for a woman named Clara who had been traveling with some Kansas families. He named her husband. I told him to state his business plainly. He said the husband had died in the winter. Fever, out in the Kansas cold. He said there were some effects, a small amount of money held by a claim agent, some property, and that to collect them she would need to come in person or to sign a paper. Clara was not in the house at that moment. She was in the east pasture. I told the man to wait, and I went to find her. I came up beside her in the long grass, and I stood there for a moment before she felt me, felt my boots on the ground, maybe, the vibration or the shift in the air, and turned. I told her with my hands, slowly, choosing each sign, what the man had said. She went very still. I signed, he's at the gate, you don't have to go out there, I'll send him away if you want. I'll handle whatever needs to be handled. She stood for a moment looking at the grass between her boots. Then she looked up at the hills. Then she signed, no, I'll see him. We walked back together. She spoke to the man, wrote on paper, read what he gave her, kept her face even throughout it. He left after 10 minutes down the road in his own dust. She stood in the yard after his horse was down the road, and I stood a few steps away and waited. I have learned to wait. It is the only useful thing to do when someone is working through something that is theirs to work through. After a while she turned and signed, it's over. I signed, yes. She looked at the east pasture, a long look unhurried. Then she signed, I thought I'd feel more. When this moment came, I imagined it so many times, I thought there would be more to it. I signed, what do you feel? She looked at me. Then she looked at the house, at the window of her room with its good east light, at the porch where we sat evenings, at the yard she had taken to sweeping without anyone asking. Then back at me. She signed like I'm already somewhere. June. I will not make the telling of this too long because some things are private, and because the simple shape is the true one. I asked her to marry me on a Sunday morning in early June on the porch before the heat came up. I had my coffee and she had hers, and the light was doing that particular June thing over the hills, low and gold and without urgency. I had thought about how to say it. I had thought about it the way I thought about most things from several sides, across several nights. I had thought about the fact that she had been a wife once and what that had cost her, and whether the word itself carried too much of that history to be useful. In the end, I said it plain because that is what I am. You don't change the way you are for important moments. The important moments are where who you are either holds or it doesn't. I signed it and I said it out loud at the same time. I had started doing that sometimes, pairing the signs with the words even though she couldn't hear the words because it felt right to use my whole self. Both things at once. She watched my hands and then she watched my face. She set her coffee down on the rail. She signed, Roy. I signed, yes. She signed, I was not going to be someone who depended on a man again. I signed, I know. She signed, you know the difference, don't you, between depending on someone and choosing someone. I thought about it. Then I signed, I think I do. You came here because you chose to. You stayed because you chose to. I'm not asking you to need me. I'm asking you to want to stay. She looked at me for a long time. The kind of looking that is actually seeing, not the polite attention people give you while they wait for their turn to talk, but the real thing, the full reading. She was reading me the way she read the land, what is actually there. Then she signed, yes. Just that. I put my cup down. I didn't know what to do with my hands for a moment, which is a strange problem for a man who has spent a year learning to talk with them. Then I reached over and she let me take her hand and hold it, and that was all I wanted right then, and it was enough. We sat on the porch a while longer. The horses were moving in the east pasture, two of them, easy and unhurried in the good green grass. The sky was going blue over the hills. Out here the mornings have a particular quality after the sun clears the ridge. Everything goes still for a moment before the day decides to start in earnest. A held breath. She had always felt that quality. She lived in it all the time, not as a loss but as a way of being fully in the moment without the clutter of sound pulling her somewhere else. I had thought, for most of my life, that silence was the absence of something, the absence of Agnes later, the thing left when everything you wanted had gone. She had shown me it wasn't that, or didn't have to be. I want to end with the hands. There are signs I know now that I didn't know before she came. Not just the words I learned from the book in those early weeks, the practical ones, water and horse and come and go, but the ones that came later, learned not from a book but from her, from years of conversation, the words her particular mind reached for. The sign for stubborn, which she used about herself with a small flat smile and which was accurate. The sign for particular, which she used to distinguish the thing from the category, not just beautiful but this specific beautiful, the August light on this specific grass on this specific morning. A sign I still can't fully translate, the one she makes looking at the ridge at dusk that means something between grateful and earned and I'm still here. And the one she taught me that first October afternoon, the one I didn't have a word for, fingers spread, the slow arc, the one that means something like as big as it needs to be. Something like free, something like belonging to no one, which is not the same as belonging to nothing. I know what it means now. Not the dictionary meaning, I still don't have a word for it in English. But I know what it feels like, standing in that east pasture in the morning with her walking ahead of me through the long grass, both of us where we chose to be. My hands know where to find her. That took 1.5 years of evenings at the kitchen table with a borrowed book and a glass of water and the particular stubbornness of a man who decided a thing was worth learning. My hands know the shape of her name and the shape of the word for good and the shape of the word for stay. The east pasture goes gold again in August. The creek is mostly running. The ranch keeps its work and I keep mine and she keeps hers. This is what she lives in, all the time. I live in it now too.